Black Mirror Season 5 premiered on Netflix on June 5th, 2019, with 3 episodes, each of which this channel will have a separate video for. Since each episode in the series is a self-contained story, there's no reason to go over the entirety of Season 5. However, if and when relevant, I'll point out any trends I notice within Season 5. Being that this is the first of 3 videos, let's begin with Episode 1, Striking Vipers. Firstly, I want to make a quick note about these videos on my channel. As someone who has written 5 novels, a film, a book of capsule reviews on cinema, and several short stories, I appreciate the creative process. With the internet giving everyone a platform, I feel that analysis on film, music, television, etc. sometimes has a tendency to simply be people venting their opinion. And these types of people have a tendency to only express when they're upset or dislike something. Case in point, I've seen more Game of Thrones videos on YouTube about the widely panned Season 8 than I've ever seen before. I'm not saying that I'm only going to focus on the positives, but when I do point out the negatives on something, I'll follow it up with a detailed explanation of why that particular creative choice did not work. So with that out of the way, let's begin with a brief summary, which is only intended to capsulize the viewing experience, not relive it with a scene-by-scene synopsis. This will be followed by pros, cons, final thought, and then my overall rating on a scale of 0 to 10, with the 5.0 being average. Striking Vipers follows a husband and wife, Danny and Theo, who have both started to struggle with the mundaneness of married life. We're introduced to them at the adventurous age of 27, and then we flash forward to 11 years and a lot of changes later. Their frustrations are put to the test when Danny uses the virtual fighting game Striking Vipers X to get his XXX on, with his friend Carl through the video game's characters, Lance and Roxette. Danny becomes addicted to this relationship, not because he's in love with Carl, but because Carl represents to Danny the adventurous life he used to have, and which Carl still has. Meanwhile, Theo begins to suspect something's amiss when Danny suddenly stops responding to her advances, even though he's the one usually instigating their romancing. But it might be that Danny recently discovered she starred in Sleepy Hollow that might be causing his whiskey dick. Anyway, Theo grows resentful because she has declined many opportunities for adventure and excitement in order to remain faithful to Danny. If you went into this episode as blind as I did, then you were probably shocked when Danny/Lance and Carl/Roxette went in for that very first kiss. When Danny was introduced to Striking Vipers X, I thought this was going to be an episode about gaming addiction, and it kinda was. In a very unusual sort of way. The great thing about this whole conflict is, writer Charlie Brooker doesn't simplify it down to sexual orientation. Danny and Carl both understandably wonder if they're possibly closet homosexuals.
So, guess that's us gay now.
And it turns out it is much more complex than that. In life they have common interests, so naturally they're friends. But in Striking Vipers X, they're in a completely different reality, in different bodies, and with different emotions, and they just cannot resist each other. They're kind of different people, and they're kind of the same. This makes the issue at hand much more complicated than attraction to someone physically or even personally. Carl even says he feels different when he takes on the role of Roxette. Charlie Brooker could have easily written this down the path of some simplistic virtual sex public service announcement, and he didn't. And I praise this episode for its complexity. Despite how the conflict was brilliantly handled, Striking Vipers at times feels like a mixture of other Black Mirror episodes. I understand this might be intentional, either as a nod or as a way to imply that Black Mirror episodes are all taking place within the same universe, but there's definitely a staleness to it. This lack of freshness might also be an inevitability, as any show is bound to recycle itself in some form or another if it goes on too long.
The only reason we die is because we accept it as an inevitability.
Do you think I'll ever find the right woman?
Oh, God, yes, man. Come on, dude, you're great.
However, the biggest issue is the contrived ending that tries to be as complicated as the far superior beginning and middle. Carl tries to convince Danny that what they're doing is no worse than watching pornography, which Danny doesn't agree with, and neither do I. This is different than porn, mainly because there are feelings involved. For the 0% of you who have never watched porn before, there's no emotional connection aside from the pleasure of watching it. Whereas there is an emotional connection between Lance and Roxette. Having that bond to someone is indeed a great risk to the relationship that Danny and Theo have spent several years building. At the same time, it's not as bad as cheating, because Danny can't return to the real world from striking Viper's ex with an STI or having impregnated his mistress. It's an in-between porn addiction and infidelity. Therefore, Danny allowing Theo to give into her temptations of going out and meeting guys doesn't seem like a happy medium, even though the show tries to pass it off as such. I'm not judging their relationship. They're two adults, and they both consented to the deal they made in the end. But I don't like how the episode implies that it's an even trade, when Theo's activities are inevitably going to be far more risky than Danny's. It's just the way it is. No matter how careful Theo is, she still runs the risk of getting impregnated by her one-night stand, or even an STI. That's always going to be a risk. And if Danny and Theo are fine with that, cool. But that would actually make for a far more interesting story. But if they wanted to go that route, why make it ambiguous? It's actually far more interesting if that issue is on the surface. The better ending would have been after Danny confesses to Theo that Theo is curious about striking Viper's ex, and she becomes addicted to it. This would really hammer home on a lot of the themes they were building towards. I really appreciate how the episode caught me completely off guard. That often doesn't happen. In previous episodes, I spotted a twist coming, but since my expectations of striking Vipers was subverted so early on, I just didn't know what to expect the rest of the time. Unfortunately, opportunities to more thoroughly examine the real-life issues that the episode was trying to imitate in parallel, such as addictions and complicated relationships, are oversimplified by a story that ultimately wants to be about commitment and sacrifice. In the right circumstance, the story of Danny and Theo's marriage could have been interesting, but not here. Striking Vipers created a delicate set of conflicts that should have been a cautionary tale about new age addictions and attractions, which is more in line with what makes Black Mirror an excellent series. The best episodes are tragedies of what could happen in the world of tomorrow. Striking Vipers ends up being an age-old story of the complexities of a long-term relationship, and it just uses Black Mirror as a unique backdrop. For the lost potential by the disappointing ending, I'm going to drop this to a 4. Thanks for watching.